you know, as a fan, he was the artist who I was most keen to talk to, whose records meant the most to me out of anyone else in music, you know. A very young man there.
You've always been in some form of journalism.
Yes.
And one of those things was you writing a book about Beastie Boys. Like really, really shit.
You've heard me rapping.
I've heard you rap. You tried to rap some of my lyrics and I was embarrassed that I made that record after I heard you rapping to them. Fucking hell.
Chris Hunt saw that there was a need for and a market for a magazine about hip hop in the UK. End of. You know, you take that away, and there's everything that flowed from the existence of Hip Hop Connection wouldn't have happened.
Most of you who were into UK hip hop back in the early days would have known my story, where I was standing on the street corners and I was selling records directly to the fans. And then that went on to me selling my records via mail order. Now, while I was doing that, there was one person who was responsible for building the awareness for what was going on back then. And I'm proud to say that I've managed to get my guy to come in here and talk to me about journalism and some of the things to do with me, because he was there from pretty much early days. So anyway, before we go on, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell to receive the notifications, like, share, and get involved in the comment section below. And now, I'm proud to be able to put a name and a face to the guy who made a lot of the awareness in my early career possible. He goes by the name of Angus Batey. How you doing, Angus?
Very good, Mr.
Excellent.
B. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really, really good. And, you know, we've been talking about doing this for like 3 years, even before the channel started.
Yes, yes.
For anyone who doesn't know much about you, because you've been in the background more than anything, you basically got into journalism pretty early on, and you're still in that world right now. But I want to start by going into how me and you met.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell the story?
Well, I'll tell the story as I remember it, and you can chip in and correct me where I got it wrong. But I was beginning my career in journalism. I was friends with some guys who were in a band called Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine. They were, I guess, an indie rock band, for want of a better term, but they used drum machines, and they were actually very heavily influenced by hip-hop. And I did a fanzine that was sold at their gigs. And I'd come across your records because I was listening to hip-hop as well. I bought Lyrical Maniac and I bought Mind. And on the back cover of Mind, I mean, most people, if you wanted to contact them because you wanted to interview them for your fanzine, there'd be an address or a phone number for the record label or something like that. On yours, it just said, if you need to contact us, just ask anyone in the Lewisham Borough. This was not normally the way that I would approach people, but I ended up going around New Cross, where I could see where the pictures were taken in New Cross, and asking random strangers if they knew Blade. And nobody did, or at least they didn't tell me to my face, because I was obviously probably a stranger, and they didn't. If they knew you, they didn't necessarily want to let on that they did. And eventually somebody must have passed a message to you, because I got a phone call from your then manager, I think, saying Blade is aware that you're trying to contact him. What's it all about? And we had a bit of a conversation, and then I came over to New Cross and met you at what I now know to have been in a little cafe around the corner from where you lived. It only took 5 minutes to realise that literally everybody there knew who you were, and they knew you by name. And I was feeling like, how's it taken me 6 months of... I'd actually gone to Raw Bass Records, which was a record shop. Now, your Lyrical Maniac... Eventually, the pressing that I got came out on Raw Bass Records, and they had an address, and it was in a shopping centre in Lewisham. And I went down there and asked for you, and they didn't know how to find you. They hadn't seen you for months. They said you occasionally dropped by, and I'd left a message there. But I think at some point I remember being told, must have been by you, that it had been somebody at the railway station who'd given you my number. And I don't remember ever giving my number to anybody at the railway station. So I've got this mental picture of network of Blade friends sort of passing my number around until it eventually got to you. So
I mean, just the bold statement.
It worked.
Ask anyone in the Lewisham Borough. That was a bold statement, but it was a statement that was very true because I knew pretty much everybody.
That first conversation was for two reasons from my perspective. I wanted to interview you for the fanzine, but I was also starting to work as a press officer, a PR person for bands, musicians who were looking to get their work publicised in. Mainly I would work with people who wanted to be in the music press. At the time that was the NME, Melody Maker, Sounds, and the monthly magazines like Q and Select and Vox. And eventually started to broaden that out, and at that time broadsheet newspapers started writing a lot more about music, and there were more opportunities to get the word out. But that was what I was trying to do. I didn't really know what I was doing or how to do it, but I was trying to set myself up in that business, and I was hoping that you might want to work with me on that basis as well, and it came to be.
You mentioned Melody Maker, you mentioned all of those magazines. We'll come and talk a little bit about them a little bit later. But from the early days, I mean, you were living with Carter, USM. Yeah?
Yeah, shared a flat with Les Fruitbat, as he was called.
Was it a flat or the house?
Well, we had a flat for a while on Acre Lane in Brixton, and then when they started doing well and they got some money, he bought a house, which is elsewhere in Brixton.
And thanks a lot for introducing me to those guys, brilliant guys. And I believe that was the show at the venue where I got booed off.
Yeah, that was interesting. That that was at the point when they were at the peak of their popularity. They released an album called 1992, the Love Album, in 1992, and that album went straight into the charts at #1, and they were doing a couple of warm-up gigs, semi-secret. Their fans knew that they were doing them, but they weren't properly advertised, and their name wasn't on the poster. Warm-up gigs for their sort of Brixton Academy headline shows and their UK tour, and one of those was at the venue in New Cross, and they invited you to play. And I think this is an interesting thing that perhaps we didn't really talk about too much at the time, but it was always implicit in my mind, was that what you were doing and what they were doing might have been musically different, although there were similarities and there were connections in approaches. But the thing that I thought their fans ought to really grasp and latch onto you for was the independent ethic. That everything was done for yourself. There was nobody who did that more than you, I don't think, in this country at that time, or probably or since. And people talk about indie music, and it's become synonymous, the word indie has become synonymous with a genre, with a sound or a style. Whereas indie, to me, was always about being independent from the mainstream and being independent from the majors and doing things your own way because that was the right way to do it. And there was you doing things independently, and there was them with a crowd who presumably valued independence. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we found out that night.
But we won them over, though.
You did.
So, and that's part of the challenge, and it was a good challenge.
It was.
It showed me what was possible, and it put me on a path to supporting loads more rock bands and other genre bands and stuff like that, and it expanded, and eventually it ended up putting me in a really good place where I was in the charts and whatever. So,
and the reason, it has to be said, the reason that worked for you is because you were ready to give that a go. And there were a lot of other people who you were making music around at the time who could have possibly done the same thing, and some who did, but some who didn't, and maybe wished that they'd tried it, because that really struck me as a sensible, adventurous, productive route to at least try travelling down.
Let's just go back to how you began, with what you were doing with journalism, because I know it didn't start with me and you with journalism. It was, you were my PR agent, you were my press agent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about you as a press agent.
It's a difficult one to really.
Well, let me simplify it.
Right.
He conned his way into it. No, go on.
Well, you're not
but
wrong.
You did, though.
No, I didn't know what I was doing. What happened was I wanted to be involved in the music business. I I guess if I put my hand on my heart, I'd say that I probably always wanted to be a journalist, but I didn't think I was good enough. The first job I got after getting my degree and finishing university was back in the library of the university. I was still doing a fanzine and doing things like that, but I was looking for a job in the music industry, and the first one that I got was with the record label Rough Trade. They're now known as a record shop, but they were a big and influential independent record label in the 70s and 80s. My first day there was the day that they discovered that they didn't have any money anymore and they were about to go out of business. And their new managing director sat me down and said, "Oh, so how are you getting on?" I said, "I'm fine, yeah, just finding my feet." And she said, "Well, I've got some bad news. We don't have any money anymore, and we're going to have to let you go at the end of the month. If you don't want to come back in, completely understand, and I'm really sorry. But if you want to, you can stay till the end of the month." And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I'll stay till the end of the month and see what I can learn. And my job was doing promotions effectively for local radio. So I did that for a while. But I sat there and I worked with Chris Stone and Paddy in the press office and learned a lot from a few weeks of being around them, understood how things worked. And then after that, Carter's press agent, a guy called Anton Brooks, who also worked for Nirvana and later for the Beastie Boys. You know, he was big, but like this, here's a guy working in a little office in a shared building off Ladbroke Grove, working hard, hustling, making a space and a living for himself. I went and did some stuff for Anton for a little while, just, you know, an afternoon every now and again or a day here and there, and learned an awful lot from him as well. So I ended up becoming a press officer because those were the only opportunities that I'd had, and that's what I'd got to learn. And so I just sort of, I ended up doing that there was a band called the Family Cat. They needed somebody to do some promotion ahead of a bunch of tour dates. They didn't have a new record. They were hoping to get a new record deal, hoping to get some money together to make a new record. In the meantime, they were supporting themselves by playing gigs, and they wanted to try and get their gigs in the local papers in all the different towns where they were playing. And I started working with them, and that was my PR business, was things like that. Then you'd go to gigs, see a band, you'd say, "I'm a press agent, do you need some help? Would you be willing to work with me?" They'd say no or yes, and if they said yes, then you'd work with them for a while and you'd see how it goes.
And that's exactly what happened with me and you.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like, because I didn't have any money.
No, no.
And up to this day, do you want to tell the story?
You've never paid me any money?
And I was waiting for that moment because I've been saving up all these years and I have a present for you, Angus.
A bag?
No, what's inside it? It's your payment for all those jobs you did for me back in the days.
Nothing! Oh, what is it? Oh, 5 pence! It's not even 5 pence. Oh, it is. It's a 5 pence piece. That's fantastic. I think you'd have thought with interest it would be a bit more. I thought for a minute. For a minute, I thought it was going to be a DAT machine.
Blame the airport security for that one.
No, but all joking aside, I mean the way that anybody has to work in that kind of environment. If you're serious about you want to work with new exciting people, then the new exciting people haven't got any money. They're pouring all of their energy and their creativity and their time into making music that they really believe in, which is what you spent 20 years doing.
And I have to say, I'm so grateful that you understood that, because most people just go, "How much you pay me? How much you pay me?" If I'd come across someone like that, people wouldn't have heard about my album. People wouldn't have heard Survival of the Hardest Working. And that awareness was so important to put me on the path that I was on, because I was doing what I could on the street, but it was limited.
Well, I think, you know, you're very kind, and it's very kind of you to say what you've said about me, but I'm absolutely convinced that you would have got through eventually anyway. And if not with me, then you'd have found somebody else who would see exactly the same things in what you were doing, and the potential of trying to bring your music to a wide audience by telling your story. It seemed a no-brainer to me, and I'm sure that there would have been other people who'd have felt the same way. But certainly the way that people who were doing what I did back then, I don't know what it's like now, but people who were doing that then, the way that you would work would be you'll find somebody nice and early on, you'll become an integral part of their team, so that when they sign on the dotted line with a major label, or when they sell enough records independently to really start to see some serious income, then you'll be kept on and you'll be paid a decent amount of money down the line. So you do a lot of work for very little or nothing to start with, but you become an integral part of that artist's crew, that artist's machinery, and you then move forward with that artist as they grow into bigger and better things. And that was how you made a business. I mean, in my case, what happened was I didn't make enough of a business to make that last, but that's okay. Eventually the PR thing fell apart for all sorts of various reasons, but I made the transition into journalism full-time at that stage, and have stayed there ever since.
Was it an easy transition?
Yes and no. It's a difficult. Here we have to get into the. We talk jocularly about money, but it's impossible to exist without it, and you need something coming in from somewhere. Now, I was able to do what I did with you, doing PR, because there would be one or two other artists that I was working with at the time who were signed to major labels, and the labels would pay me a certain amount of money per month that was enough for me to meet all of my outgoings and eat and get around on my travel card and all the rest of it. When that went away, yes, you can do some journalism, and you go to somebody and you'll say, I'm a journalist and I'd like to write this piece for you, and they say yes please, and they'll say do however many words by Friday, and then eventually they'll pay you a small amount of money, but it's a one-off and it comes in every now and again as you're able to get some work. So I think for a lot of people, and myself included, that journalism became something that you did either while you're doing another job part-time or while you're signing on. Both of which I did for different durations while you're getting established. But eventually you get to a point where you don't need those other financial supports, and you can earn enough to keep going just from doing what it is that you actually want to do.
So how did you finance yourself going to all these shows to meet these people if you had no income coming in? Were you recognized and people were just going, yo, Angus on the guest list, blah, blah?
Pretty much. You're talking here about when you're trying to find, all right, your question relates perhaps to the time when I'm still doing PR, where I'm looking for new artists to work with. You're not going to find them by going to see shows at Brixton Academy or Wembley Arena or today at the O2 or anything like that.
Small events,
it's small venues. And a lot of the time, the people who put the shows on at the small venues are the ones who are first telling you should come and check this out, because they know who you are and what you're trying to do, and they see something in what you're doing that has some synergy or comparison or point of reference with what they're doing and how they operate. I was good friends with guys, Chris, Mark and Pat, who called themselves the Cube Club, and they used to promote gigs at the Bull and Gate in Kentish Town. Next door to what was the Town and Country Club then is the Forum these days. And the back room there would have bands on almost every night of the week. The dead nights, the difficult nights to get anybody to go out and see music, were Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. And the Cube round the Bull and Gate on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. They put on first gigs in London. The Manic Street Preachers, huge band, hugely important in the history of British music. Their first London gig was at the Bull and Gate, first on a Tuesday night. And the Cube guys put them on. And I don't know if I was there that night. I can't really remember. I was never a particular fan of their band, but I do remember that happened. And I remember that I would have been able to go there and chat to the guys on the door, go in and see whatever bands I wanted to see without having to pay anything.
Let me try and make sense of what you just said. Okay, so you said you would go and find artists in small venues. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't go to all these big venues or festivals or whatever. Right? So you've got like 100, 200 capacity venue, 300 maybe, and you'd meet the artists, but you wouldn't go to, I don't know, somewhere where there's 10,000 people. Yeah?
Correct, broadly.
But you went and found me in an entire neighborhood. Makes sense of that. Where's the logic?
There is no logic, but then we're dealing with Blade.
So you're originally from?
Well, that's a good question. My parents are from the northeast.
Okay.
I was born in Birmingham.
Oh.
And before I went to school, I talked with the Northeast accent. Then when I went to school, I started talking with the Birmingham accent. Then at the age of 10, we moved to Cumbria. And so this sort of Geordie, Brummy, Cumbrian accent came out. And then at the age of 18, I moved to London. And every time you go into a new environment, you end up adopting some of the ways that people speak because you want to be understood. And so my accent is a real sort of mongrel accent that's been put together from all these different parts. Occasionally people will tell me that they think I'm from Manchester, which I think is interesting because it's almost the midpoint between all of the different places that I've lived.
So if you were a rapper now, would you be rapping in an American accent or in your own accent?
Well, now there's two questions there in one. One is, if I had technical skills enough to be a rapper, would I choose to rap in my own accent, or would I choose an accent that I felt suited the style of the music that I wished to make? It's very difficult. I don't know. I've never been that talented at music.
You know what? I can vouch for that. He was actually really shit when I heard him rapping. Like really, really shit.
You've heard me rapping.
I've heard you rap. You tried to rap some of my lyrics and I was embarrassed that I made that record after I heard you rapping to them. Fucking hell. Yeah, seriously, he was shit.
I've managed to erase that entirely from my mind.
I wish I could. But you made up for it as my press agent, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think everybody who does something that's creatively important, even if it's only creatively important in their own mind, I mean, that's the first place it's got to work. And then they've got to do something that they think feels real and true to them. And it may well be that some people feel that they best express their art and their creativity by adopting a different voice when they perform vocally, and that would apply to singers or performance poets as much as it would to rappers. But yeah, it's interesting that your voice. Nowadays, people come into the channel, they have many opportunities to hear your speaking voice, and it is your rapping voice, and there's no doubt about that. But I guess, yeah, you would have had a number of people over the years who've accused you of adopting an American accent because you don't have the stereotypical British accent.
You know, I find that entertaining, and one of my fans or followers on social media said something because someone was saying I rapped in an American accent, and they said, well, you're saying that all these MCs from the early days were rapping in American accents and you put Blade in that category. Fair enough if that's what you think. But what they said that was entertaining about it was like, so you want him to rap in a Cockney accent when really he's from Armenia and he's rapping in the accent he speaks. Don't you think that will make Blade more fake?
Yeah.
If he was to do an accent, you know, in a Cockney accent, and do you get what I mean? That
No,
wasn't
absolutely.
me.
No.
How I talk is how I rap.
But at the same time, if you decided that you wanted to do a track or an album in any accent because that was the point and the purpose and it was part of what you were doing in that project, then you would have gone ahead and done it. And that's perfectly fine. It's a legitimate and reasonable choice for the artist and the creative person to make. You know, be what you want to be in the moment of creation. That's, no problem. There's British rappers who rap in American accents. I've not heard an American rapper rap in a British accent, but I'm sure that somebody's probably tried it, even if it's only for a line. It doesn't matter as long as it's what, if the artist feels sincerely that this is the work that they want to make, and then it's up to the audience to decide if they wish to engage with that or not. People may say it's failed if nobody buys it or likes it or listens to it, but if the artist's happy with it, then it's a success.
Exactly. Simple, innit? Have you ever made any records?
Not exactly.
Do you want to tell the story or should I?
I did a remix once.
Okay.
It was for a band called Sullen. Mm-hmm. Their A&R man in the UK was the former Undertones singer Fergal Sharkey.
Oh, wow.
Who's gone on to many different things these days. The Undertones were the first band I ever went to see live at Carlisle Market Hall when I was about, 12 or something like that. Anyway, he got in touch and he asked me to do a remix. I went, got a budget, went into a studio and did a remix. I played a bass on it. Nigel engineered it for me. Nigel did it basically because I don't know what I'm doing in a recording studio. I watched you guys at work several times. It's been a great honour and a privilege to see you making the Rough It Up EP. I'm sort of in the studio for most of your work on that. And yeah, so I did this remix, and they put it on the record, and it's great. And then years later, I was talking about this to Anton, actually, the Carter's PR, and he said, "Well, he got you to do it. I told him to get Blade." But because I was DJing for you live at the time, he thought I was doing your music.
I didn't know that story. I really didn't. So all I'm going to say at this point is, you see all that money I owed you? You got it paid back.
Spend it all on studio time.
No, you got your payment back for using my name falsely. So basically, from things that you've said, you conned your way into being a PR agent, right? You conned your way into doing remixes. What else have you conned your way into?
Well, I managed to be your tour DJ for about 6 months.
You did as well. Do you remember how that started? I'm curious.
I don't remember. All I remember was you got to the point, and the joking aside, the DAT machine was a part of it, because live performance, when I first met you, live performance was you using the instrumental version on the 12-inch that was released to rap over. But a lot of the time the decks would be on the stage would be somewhat bouncy, the stage would be in a room that there was loads of people jumping up and down, so the whole room would be a little bit bouncy, and the turntables would be going up and down as well, and so the needle would skip on the instrumentals. But I had a DAT machine, which I can't remember quite why I bought that, but I think it was to do better quality interview recording or something of that nature. When they first became sort of vaguely affordable, a little portable one the size of
about £500 or something.
Yeah, that kind of thing, and realised that it would actually be quite a good thing for you to put the backing tracks on, because it wouldn't skip. And so I think it was just like, it was around the time that you and Renegade had parted ways. Grasshopper was doing your DJing in the studio, but because he was based in Belgium, he wasn't always available for every show. And I knew how to use the DAT machine. So I think that's how come I ended up standing behind you at a handful of gigs in various places in the country, and doing my inept version of scratching while playing instrumentals on a DAT.
Do you remember the first show we did?
I remember one in Glasgow. I remember the one in Exeter with Collapsed Lung, which is Nihal, who's now on Five Live.
Yeah.
And I remember one in Newcastle with Dr. Fibes.
Yeah.
But I can't remember which one was first.
You know what? Let's go back to your journey into music. You started really young, and you were hogging up the turntables in your school.
I would say that everything that I've done to do with music, whether it's doing PR or doing journalism, possibly even DJ, well, certainly doing club DJing, which I've done as well. I probably didn't have qualifications or permission to do that either. But it all goes back to, when I was in sixth form, I used to buy records, and I'd get to the school early, and I'd be the first one in the sixth form common room, so my choice would be on the stereo when everybody else turned up, and I'd just be going, listen to this, it's great, whatever it was that I just bought. And that's all I've ever done throughout my career, is just basically tried to find a different way of saying, listen to this, it's great. You can do it by persuading other journalists to write about artists that you believe in, which is what the PR thing is. You can do it by playing the records in front of other people at live events, which is club DJing. Or you can do it by writing about those records and those artists directly for different magazines and newspapers, which is the journalism.
When you were in that sixth form room, were you looking at it like, I want to be a musician, or did you think journalism was the path?
I didn't think it was a job. I just thought this is just this is just a thing that I like, that I do. It never occurred to me that anyone would ever, that there was a possibility you could ever get paid for doing that.
How did you feel when the first payment came in?
Surprised.
Happy? Or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I still am. You know, the point where I get most excited, if I'm being honest, is the point when someone says yes to an idea.
For me, what I enjoyed about when we were working together was that what you just said there, the word idea. You would listen to my ideas, but you would throw ideas in too. There wasn't money involved, like you said, because you actually, when you first came to me, you didn't mention money.
No.
You knew we couldn't afford anything, but you were still happy to go ahead and do the things. You knew that from the get-go. But the fact that you were so enthusiastic about it, and you've gone on to do some major, major things in journalism as well. Like not just music journalism.
No, no.
You know, so if we talk about your journalism in music, I mean, you've done some serious interviews.
Yeah, again, I've been very lucky and very privileged.
Do you want to list a bunch of names?
No, you can give.
Well, I know about Master Race.
Yeah,
I know about the obvious one, which is Rakim.
yeah,
And I know about LL Cool J.
yeah.
And the rest of it, if you want to find out, just go back and read every episode of Hip Hop Connection magazine. But there's others. There's NME, Melody Maker. In fact,
I never wrote for Melody Maker.
Was it NME that said something about if you want real independence, this is the guy, and that was you that got it in there, right?
Well, there were a number of pieces that were written about you during the time when I was doing your
How
press.
the fuck did you get me in NME?
That was absolutely, as we were talking before. I mean, that absolutely to me, it didn't even occur to me that they wouldn't. Is actually the way that I approached it. It was just a case of who's going to do it. It was so obviously the sort of thing that they would want to cover for all of the reasons that we've previously discussed. I mean, it's independent of the music industry. You told people that there was another way of making records and having success, being a creative person in music in this country. No one else was doing that. And it was a story that was begging to be written. It was almost like the story's great, even if the record's rubbish, we'll still do it.
So basically, what you're saying is, what you're saying is basically the story was great, but I was rubbish.
No, I'm saying,
you won't be the first person.
Wouldn't know. The point is, you made it easy to convince people that there was a story there to tell because you'd become a story. You just hadn't allowed anybody, or he hadn't met anybody who was interested in telling it. That was all I did, was introduce you to the people who are interested in telling your story.
And it's just suddenly occurred to me, like, you picked up a lot of knowledge being around me in the studios, doing whatever else. So whatever money I owed you, we're even. Again, that's twice we're even. So actually we're uneven. You owe me now.
Well, when I wrote a piece about you a few years ago, and I did actually put in there that while you never paid me for my PR work, the amount that I learned from you, I should probably have paid you.
Okay, and I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Obviously, it's jokes amongst friends and everything. Yeah. For me, my biggest inspiration in all of this was probably LL Cool J. There's loads of other people. There's MC Globe, with Soul Sonic Force, and there's loads. Dougie Fresh, KRS-One. But LL Cool J for me was the biggest influence because he was so young and he just went and murdered those stages, and you got to interview him. But the story I want to hear is the Rakim one because he hadn't done any interviews for a while.
Yeah, he was very difficult to get hold of. There were a number of reasons for that. It's important to also perhaps to point out for people with a broad understanding of hip hop's history. I didn't really get a chance to start doing any of this work I wasn't at the point where I was getting in front of people and doing interviews with them until probably 1993. I'd done a couple before that, including yourself, but I wasn't regularly writing music press interviews, and those were the opportunities. You see, that's the way that this industry worked then. Whether it works the same way today or not, I couldn't say, but back then, you get an artist who had some big credibility and presence and sales, and their time to do press would be limited, and their press agents would be on the lookout for the best possible opportunity for them to speak to one person and for that to really count. So they'd go for people who wrote for magazines with large sales figures that were, and the sales of those magazines were likely to be to people who were going to be interested in buying that artist's record, like an appropriate audience. So talking to US rappers as a little beginner journalist in the UK wasn't particularly easy until you already had earned your space in one of those big mainstream magazines. For me, it was NME. I started by writing reviews of albums. 92 was when I began doing stuff for them, and by 1993 they were letting me do the occasional interview. Rakim's first 4 albums, I reviewed the 4th one, Don't Sweat the Technique. That was the first time I wrote about him anywhere. But that was it. And then there was problems backstage that we as fans or as the audience were not really aware of or privy to. We knew that there was something going on, and he and Eric didn't make a record together again, and it was several years before he came out with the solo album. But there was a long period between 1992 and I think 97 or 98 when the solo album came out, where he just wasn't around. And today, he would have been on, I guess, and somebody like that would have had a social media presence, whether he was using it himself or he had a team of people around him to do it. There'd be some sort of constant dialogue or some presence that the fans would have to keep them going. He might even be putting little 30-second clips of new material up every now and again, just to keep everybody bubbling away in there, make sure their excitement for his new project didn't disappear. But back then it was just silence. And so any time that I ended up talking to somebody, be it an artist or a press agent or somebody within a record company or another journalist or a well-connected fan, I'd be asking them, what's happening with Rakim? Or is there any way of getting to him? And I just kept on trying to have those conversations. I remember being in New York to do something else and finding that he'd set up a company called The Last Platoon that was going to be doing sort of management and merchandise and things like that, and there was going to be a crew of other MCs that were going to come out under that banner. Tried to go there, promised me that they'd talk to him and get him to talk to me, and that never happened. Eventually I found somebody who was his lawyer, and he said, I can sort you out an interview. So I thought, great, and I bought a ticket and I went to New York, and he didn't turn up. I was there in his lawyer's office just off Bryant Park in the centre of Manhattan. And I was thinking, what's going on here? And he said, no, there's been some... It was genuine. It was something like, if my memory serves me correctly, one of his children had started a new school that day, and there'd been some problem with the enrolment, and he had to go and sort that out. And he lived out in Long Island. He was well outside the city centre. But they said, come back tomorrow, he'll definitely be there tomorrow. And I'm like, well, I hope he is, because my flight home is tomorrow afternoon. But he turned up, he was there, and we sat, and I, as a fan, he was the artist who I was most keen to talk to, whose records meant the most to me out of anyone else in music, A very young man there. And he sat patiently, and he answered every question I had as a fan and as a fan. I was going to say as a fan and as a critic. How can you be a critic?
You can't.
There are some artists that are beyond it, and he made records that will stand the test of time as long as people can play music that's been recorded in the 20th century. Then those records will last, and they'll always speak to new people, and they'll always say new things to you. So to get a chance to hear from the guy who made them, who wrote them, about what was going on in his head at the time. When I went to university, I did history of art, and people often say to me, what's history of art got to do with hip-hop music? And it's all about putting yourself in the mind of a creative person at the moment that they make something that lasts, and figuring out what they were thinking and why. We might not have an opportunity to talk to Leonardo da Vinci or the people who designed Chartres Cathedral, but we have an opportunity to talk to Rakim, and he'll tell you what was going on when he built his cathedral of poetry. And there's nothing better.
And at this point, I just want to show people this, because this autograph from Rakim has got to Blade and Little Ra, Rakim Allah, and I believe it says Peace, Love, 96 style. So it was 96, not 97.
No, well, 97 would be when his album came out, but we got to
you got the
before,
interview.
yeah.
And it was Angus who got this for me. So again, thanks a lot for that.
Yeah,
really appreciate that. So what was it like interviewing Rakim? And you must have been sitting in that room and pretty much shitting bricks at one point.
Well, I was just delighted that it was happening, and so excited about every every opportunity to ask all those questions that you'd always wanted to ask. And he was so, kept thinking he's going to have to go now. But he didn't, and we just talked for, I used little...
Well, he did, but it was to the toilet. And you happened to share that toilet break with him as well.
We both had to go to the loo. We talked for so long that we both needed a...
Did you carry on the interview in the toilet?
No, we didn't take the tape machine. The tape machine stayed in the office, I promise you that.
In the music world, there's a lot of fake stuff that goes on and a lot of real stuff. So when you interview people, do you ever come across anybody that you just think, this is all bullshit, or... Do you know what I mean? Like, for example, let's talk about Akon.
Yeah, he's somebody who I think had decided that there was a greater truth that needed to be imparted and that there was a creative way of presenting that truth. I'm not making excuses for him, but he allowed, I think it's fair to say, he allowed a version of a supposed reality around him to become accepted as the truth that probably wasn't the truth. I spoke to him shortly after, or a few months after, an online site called The Smoking Gun had published information showing that what he had been saying in some interviews, or what people had been claiming on his behalf about his past as a part of a car thief ring, was probably embellished. You know, it wasn't, he might have been involved, but probably in a minor way, or he might not have done the things that he's later considered to have done. And his argument boiled down to its essence was, does that really matter if by me making this story entertaining, it gets a message across that is worth hearing? And I think that's a really good question.
So basically what he's saying is that it's okay to make up something because it's pretty much entertainment, and as long as you're doing it as entertainment and it's not harming anybody or hurting anybody, then what's the problem?
And I think he's also adding to that if you're doing that in pursuit of some higher purpose that you believe to be the case, then it's justifiable and it's fair enough.
Which he did, and he achieved.
So you could argue quite easily that he was right to choose the path that he chose.
Isn't the message then sending to everybody that, yo, fake your way till you make it?
I've spent a lot of my music journalism career working on hip-hop, and there's no genre that's more obsessed with, quote-unquote, keeping it real, with being authentic and true to yourself. But there's also probably no genre where you get so many people that are very careful in constructing an image of that they want to portray. And then then the question is, what's the chicken and what's the egg? If the end result is somebody's life being improved in some measure, be it by getting some pleasure from a record that they like, or hearing a message in some music that they wouldn't have otherwise heard, does it matter? I think that's a fair point.
Who's the most memorable interview that you've done?
Well, Rakim, clearly.
Has to be in it.
I've done some, there's been some interesting... I remember interviewing Bono.
Wow.
And Wyclef. Do you remember that they did a record together?
Yeah.
They did some very sort of hush-hush last-minute arrangement, PR. My memory is it was a recording studio somewhere near Heathrow. They did very brief interviews. That was strange and weird and good, exciting. Terry Callier. Nobody really knows that name anymore these days, unfortunately. The late, great Terry Callier, Chicago soul singer, went under the radar for a long time, rediscovered by the likes of Eddie Piller and Giles Peterson in the 1990s, came back and had a complete career rebirth, played the Jazz Cafe to people in floods of tears with the wonderful beauty of his music that had been lost and reborn again. I had the opportunity to talk to him on several occasions, and he was a wonderful guy to talk to. He spoke about songwriting being a gift from God, that he didn't feel that he wrote the songs, he felt that they were written through him. I remember an interview with CeeLo and Danger Mouse when they did the Gnarls Barkley project, and CeeLo said exactly that about the lyrics to the song Crazy, that it was like walking into a tomb and wiping the sand and the dust off the wall, and there were the lyrics just waiting for you. You know, moments like that. I mean, when somebody tells you something that's their art that they've made, that you care about enough to want to make the arrangement. Yeah, you get paid for being there. It's an amazing job, but you know, you have to work hard to get the opportunity to be in the room with somebody, and then when they give something like that to you, it's a gift that you know you're humbled by, and you'll live with me forever.
Yeah. Have you ever done anything where you thought it's a message from God being delivered through the journalist? Seriously?
No, I'd never thought of it in that way. There's sometimes I've gone back for some reason, maybe years later, I've had to reread something that I've written, and I've actually been pleasantly surprised. Once or twice I remember thinking, blimey, I was actually doing better than I thought I was. Because that's another thing, and I think this is something that we've talked about at times over the years as well. While you get better by doing whatever it is you do more often, I think that's true of whatever your discipline is, be it creative or practical. One thing that I think people don't talk about very much, or enough really, is how, in theory, your confidence should increase. But I say for myself, that's not necessarily the case. I certainly feel as uncertain of myself and as unsure of the quality of what I do every time I do something than I did at the beginning. That never seems to grow. And so you're always somewhat fumbling in the dark, not really sure if what you're doing is what it needs to be and what you want it to be, and what your, more importantly from my perspective, what your paying client needs it to be. So you're always kind of overjoyed at the moment when they say, yes, please do this work, we'd like you to do it. And then you're also overjoyed when you see it in print and it's more or less what you gave them. It hasn't been changed too much, and you know, you think, okay, it's hit the spot, thank you, phew, on to the next one. But that doesn't mean that you approach the next one necessarily thinking, I've cracked it, I can do this. But then I think there's something, on the one hand, while I think there's something that might hold you back in that failure to build confidence, if you like, there's also something valuable and useful that you never need to lose entirely, which is, I would suggest that at the moment where you think, I've got this, I can do it, whatever, easy as falling off a log, that's when you're going to fail.
Makes a lot of sense, because you put pressure on yourself.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, I would kind of like to be able to dial that pressure down a bit and maybe have a more realistic setting for it. But I'm pleased that the pressure is there, because without the pressure, I think that would be when I would truly start to make problems for myself.
You know, in the early days when you were doing the PR stuff, I forgot to mention, you were working with a certain person that went on to be pretty much a megastar.
PJ Harvey.
Yeah.
Polly, another amazing talent, who very, very privileged to be able to spend time with her as well. Yeah, that was, again, it was one of those situations. It was exactly that situation, in fact, that we were talking about before. There was a little club venue on a Saturday in a basement of a pub in West Hampstead Heath, somewhere like that, run by two guys who also ran a record label called Too Pure, Richard and Paul. And they had a band signed to their label called the Faith Healers, who I really liked. And I said to them, I'd love to do your press for the Faith Healers. And I said, well, we really need the help. That's great. Would you do these other two bands that we've signed as well? One was Moonshake, who were really great, and I got to work with them, and they were fantastic. And the other was PJ Harvey. And so all I did was I sent PJ Harvey's first records to some journalists. That's, you know, anybody could have done that. The big thing that turned the catalyst there on the press side of it was that first single was sent in to the NME in the week when they had John Peel as their guest singles reviewer that week. John Peel made it single of the week. And then suddenly it went from me calling up people saying, have you listened to the PJ Harvey record yet? To people calling me and saying, can I have the PJ Harvey record, please? That was what happened. And it was John Peel that really broke her. But yeah, I worked with her on the first album through to Pure. Then she signed to Ireland on the second album that she did. Her first album for Ireland called Rid of Me, worked on that as well. And then in the build up to the third album, finally she had various changes of management, and she ended up with the people who manage U2, and I was clearly the wrong fit for the way that they operate, and clearly not. I've been winging it. We talk about the confidence. Yeah. I've been winging it for however long I had. My luck ran out. They needed somebody, and she needed somebody who was much more professional and switched on and knew exactly how to do this job, rather than somebody making it up as they went on. And of course, she went on to everything that she's gone on to after that, which, just amazing that I was ever a part of that story, really.
And not long after that, that was your exit from being a press agent?
Well, it was actually all around the same time. There was her, and then there was Family Cat lost their record deal that they'd had, and the other band that I had who were paying me regularly at the time was Blaggers, who you remember, and they ended up out of a deal as well. In fact, they pretty much split up at that point. So, and those three things all happened in the space of about 2 weeks. So I went from having a reasonably viable business to no income, and that was the point where I just had to knock it on the head. And
you also had to knock journalism and music on the head as well. So
my feeling was that I was getting too old, or that I was going to end up getting too old to be credibly writing about music being made by people who predominantly are in their late teens and early 20s, and bought by people who are probably in that same age bracket as well. You can do that when you're in your 30s. You could possibly do that into your 40s, but I'm in my 50s now. Can I credibly be writing about something that, what do I know about what's going on in the mind of a teenager? Pretty much nothing. I can't credibly be doing that job now. I'd sort of felt that was what that was the direction I was heading probably when I was getting towards the end of my 30s. I needed to be doing something else for that reason. As it turned out, I probably needed to be doing something else for a different reason. The different reason being that the digital thing had come along and completely disrupted the music industry. We know the Napster and MP3s and all of that. We know that story, and we don't need to rehash it here. But the same thing happened to the music media, because media were getting caned by digital technology. Everybody was getting their news and their music reviews online for free, and they didn't need to go out and buy a paper magazine every month or every week. And also the music companies, the record companies that would advertise in those music magazines, they were losing money hand over fist because of the music piracy and all the rest of it. So they weren't spending as much money on the adverts. You got the two income streams into music media, the sales of the magazines and the advertising from the music industry. They both started to fall apart at the same time. And so the amount of money that's there to spend on journalism, to spend on the freelance person who's doing the down page reviews, that money gets squeezed as well. So there were less opportunities to get paid to do it. So I was looking around for other things to do, and I started writing about other kinds of other subject matter, probably for the wrong reason, but I did. It was a good move.
You still carried on writing?
Yeah.
So you've always been in some form of journalism?
Yes.
And one of those things was you writing a book about Beastie Boys.
I'm proud of the achievement of writing a book. That isn't the book that I wanted to write. I was approached by the publisher, a guy called Martin Roach, who ran an imprint called the Independent Music Press, IMP. He said, I'm looking for somebody to write a Beastie Boys book. Would you be up for it? And I'm like, well, great to be asked. I was very much still doing music journalism then. We're talking 1997, somewhere around there. And I said, yeah, well, what I really don't want to do is I don't want it to be one of those books where there's no access to the artist and you just end up writing, you tell the story and it's all the quotes are blah, 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 as he told the enemy in 1988. So as long as we don't do that, then yeah, I'm in. And by the time we got to the point where it was too late for me to back out, I found that I wasn't able to get any access to the band. Their attitude, entirely fairly and reasonably, was, look, I had met them before and we got on pretty well, and they knew who I was, which is an amazing thing to me to this day. But their view was, look, if we said yes to you, we'd have to say yes to everybody else. And we get loads of people asking us to contribute to their books or their whatever it is, and we'd never have any time. So we're going to have to say no, sorry. And I get it, but it's too late for me to not do it now. So I ended up writing the As He Said to NME in 1998 book, which is a pity, but there we are.
Are you saying you regretted writing the book?
No. It was a massive, valuable learning curve for me. It's just not the book that I wanted to write.
Okay. You win some, you lose some, right?
Absolutely. But I've written a book,
Yeah.
The best thing about that book, to me, somewhere near the beginning, it says a catalogue for this book exists in the British Library.
Can you just clearly give me a list of the magazines and, any widespread stuff that you've written for over the years? I know Hip Hop Connection is one of them.
Yeah.
NME is another.
I mean, we've got to. I have to say, when we didn't mention this in the context of the Rakim interview, but some of the work that I've been most proud of and that I've been most excited to do was done for Hip Hop Connection, and most of that under the long-term tenureship of Andy Cowan as editor. Andy was great to work with and for. That Rakim piece, Andy's a huge part of that. It would never have happened if he didn't have the faith in me to do it. And giving me the time and the space. I mean, he just basically said, I said, how much can you take? He said, how many words can you do? I said, well, how long's a piece of string? I can do the whole, we could almost have filled the whole magazine, and he gave me enough space to do that justice. Nobody else would have been like that. Any other outlet would have restricted you to a page or two. The artist didn't have a new record out at that time. Magazines generally will want to know that their coverage comes as part of a bigger package of events in the public's mind, so that it will give people a reason to pick up the magazine and buy it and read it. And generally that means your coverage comes out at a time when the record company is busy promoting the new release, or the artist is on tour and in the public mind for other reasons, and so they're primed to want to read an interview with them. Andy just thought, it's Rakim. It's got to be big. We've got to do it now. and he is absolutely right. And, working for Andy was great. Did loads of great stuff for Hip Hop Connection. I say great. I mean, things that were great to me.
I have to actually cut in on that one and say things that were great for the scene here. Like, he done a lot, not just for the scene here. I mean, a lot of the Americans probably wouldn't have got the recognition they deserved and went on to bigger things if it wasn't for people like Andy.
Absolutely.
And that needs to be made clear. Andy Cowan is like a gem.
And Chris Hunt, who was the editor, and Michael Leonard in between them as well.
Okay.
They were, and Alex Constantinides was the first person who ever gave me any paid work. He let me review a record for Hip Hop Connection. All these are really important people.
Yeah. And just for anyone who doesn't know, explain in a sentence or two what these guys did.
Are you asking me to explain what a magazine editor does?
I'm asking you to explain what a difference they made.
Oh, well, Chris Hunt saw that there was a need for and a market for a magazine about hip-hop in the UK. End of. You take that away and there's... everything that flowed from the existence of Hip Hop Connection wouldn't have happened.
We're talking about an underground scene. There was an underground scene here. It was for the kids and whatever. But you gave me a sales figure on the amount they used to sell on a monthly basis, which I was like, whoa.
As a freelance contributor, you don't go into an office. You're working from home. You're liaising by phone and email with your editor. And you're not the one in the meetings where you get told the sales figures. I do seem to remember that NME figures. That's a very successful mass market publication. At the height of, say, Manchester, when the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses were around, there was huge interest in British music, and the music press was still flourishing. They would sell 150, maybe more, 1,000 copies a week. By the time NME ceased publication as a print title around the 2010 era, it was down to like 15,000, 20,000. Hip Hop Connection would be more specialist than that. It would never have sold those massive hundreds and multiple hundreds of thousands of units, but you know, you can't put a print product together, pay someone to print it, pay all the people to write it and take the photographs in it, pay all the people to design it, pay the people to take it to the shops, allow the shopkeepers to have their margin to sell it. You know, you can't do all of that properly if you're not selling sufficient copies to make it break even. I know there's adverts in the magazine, but the adverts ought to be the cherry on top. They ought to be the profit, and the rest of it ought to pay for itself. And I think if you're selling small numbers of, you know, in the tens of thousands or the 20s of thousands, it's very difficult to have a viable business. And that's not music magazines, that's magazines.
In general, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then you went on to, from music journalism, you then went on to doing journalism about
Other stuff.
other stuff. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I've ended up talking about, writing about aerospace, in for want of a better term, things that fly, things that go into things that fly, people who fly them, and defence through an interest in flying equipment. Again, you know, people will say to me, "What's the connection between defence journalism or aerospace journalism and hip hop?" And there's lots of sort of cheesy, glib answers I could give to that, but the serious one is, if you got an opportunity to sit and talk to Rakim and ask him about what was going on in his head when he's making Follow the Leader or In the Ghetto, and you got an opportunity to go and talk to the guy who designed an unmanned aircraft that's solar powered and that flies for 6 weeks at the edge of space, and he'll tell you what was going on in his head while he was designing that, then those are very similar conversations, albeit one is about art and creativity and poetry, and the other one is about science and technology and mathematics and aerodynamics. You're still talking to somebody who's created something that's special and important, and it's a privilege and an honour to get to have that conversation, and hopefully to be able to translate some of what that conversation means to you in a way that will resonate with other people who might read it.
And have you ever been sort of on the front line at any war situation, anything like that?
No, that's not the kind of reporting that I would do. There's plenty of people who do that. I have utmost respect for them. It's not something, I'm far too much of a coward to do that. I did get an opportunity to go to Camp Bastion in Afghanistan for a few days, a couple of weeks with the British military, which was an amazing experience. You know, really humbling. In fact, while I was there was the time when there was a bunch of riots going on in North London, and I remember sitting in the mess hall, one of the mess halls in Camp Bastion. And Camp Bastion, let's face it, we talk about the idea the camp thing makes you think it's a bunch of tents in the desert. It is a bunch of tents in the desert, or it was when it still existed, but it was huge. It was the size of Reading. And it had I believe I'm right in saying, the busiest single runway airfield operated by British people other than Gatwick anywhere in the world. So it was a miniature city with a huge airfield sat in the middle of the desert, but it was in the middle of the desert in Afghanistan while there was a war going on. So, you know, it's not a benign environment, but you sat there in one of the many mess halls, and they've got the big screens on the wall showing Sky News from back home with people rioting in London, and you're thinking, I'm actually more concerned for the well-being of my friends back at home than I am for myself here, because I am in the safest place. I'm surrounded by thousands of highly trained people with very, very scary weaponry who will be first, you know, they will run towards trouble while I'll be cowering under a desk. Okay. And lots of these things. I mean, I got there. They give you this induction training on on your first full day there, and I basically got heat stroke. I I was fine, and then I suddenly wasn't. I suddenly realised I couldn't actually move. I couldn't walk. I was wearing this body armour, and a guy had to come and sort of pour bottles of water over my head, and they had to put me under a tarpaulin and take me into a cold, dark room and lie me down for half an hour before I was okay. And then all I'd done was just hang around in the sun wearing some body armour while some people gave me some instructions. And you talk to the Marines and the army folks who were going out there wearing not just the body armour, but a pack that weighed almost half of them, their body weight, loads of equipment that they needed to be able to see what was going on, weapons that they needed to defend themselves, and they're doing this for hours every day. I mean, it's beyond belief.
So you're definitely not built for war.
Definitely not built for war.
Have you ever driven a tank?
I have driven a tank. I've driven a CV90 at BAE Systems Hägglund facility in Sweden around their test track. That was amazing. It didn't have a gun on it, didn't let me fire it, but still it was a tank. Excellent. I'm happy with that.
Excellent.
It's not really a tank. It's not what they call a main battle tank, but it's a tracked armoured vehicle. But still, I'm calling it a tank. So, I flew a helicopter once.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For about 7 seconds. The guy sat next to me said, "Okay, if you hold that thing steady and don't touch that one down at the side at all, see if you can keep it in a hover." 7 seconds was how long it took me to realise that whatever I was doing, it was having the opposite effect to what I thought it was having. And it just started to click, and then he said, "My aeroplane," and took back control before we ended up in a tree.
Honest answer. Mm-hmm. Which do you prefer? Journalism for music or journalism for aerospace? And do you regret ever leaving the music?
Well, no, I still can do it. You see, this is the thing. I don't feel like I've had to choose. In many respects, the choice is made for me. I'd still like to think I could do a good job when, you know, if Rakim gifts us with another album, I'd certainly be angling wherever possible to write to get to speak to him again and write an interview with him. But I couldn't, you know, I'm not in that game of, I'm not a person now who has the credibility or the knowledge or the understanding to be able to speak with any degree of usefulness about what's really going on in music today.
Yeah, and I was there, and I saw how you were living the music.
Yeah,
you know, you will not just only you were living the music, but you were living with the musicians as well. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's a crazy one. But anyway, have you got any final words? Is there anything you'd like the public to know? The
music journalism that I still do is mainly for the website thequietus.com, where I've written about yourself. The type of work that I do for them mainly is anniversary look backs. You know, it'll be 20 years or 30 years since the release of a particular album, and I'll write a piece going into what that record meant at the time, what the artist was doing. If I've got some old interview material, I'll use that, tell the story a bit, and sort of say about why it might still be of interest or importance and worth people going back and having a listen to again. And I love doing those sort of things, but I've been doing them long enough now that some of the ones are being re-promoted because I've done them 10 years ago, and it's time to reshow it because it's the 30th anniversary now rather than the 20th.
Okay. Well, guys, you heard it here. Angus Batey. This guy has been in my life for a long time, and he's done me a lot of good deeds where he's got me out there, and is someone that you definitely should be checking out. Aside from that, I wish I could say go and check him on his socials, but if you want to find him, you're going to need to hire yourself a private detective because he's nowhere to be seen. But yeah, please subscribe to the channel. Click the bell to receive the notifications, like, share, and get involved in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and Angus, thanks again. Really appreciate you coming down.
No problem. My pleasure.